back to the Summer Podcast at FBC. We are enjoying our summer, going through James and talking with our friends Stephen and Emily Rossi today. So, Glen, we are back. I was gone for the weekend, but welcome. And you were gone for a whole week up in Hume Lake. So, but we are continuing through the book of James.
I was here holding down the fort.
Yeah, you were. Good job. Well done, my friend. It was a light week in the church office during Hume Lake week. So, for sure, that's always a good thing. God's working in Hume Lake. We'll talk about that in a minute. But we always start with the sermon. James chapter 1. Glen, you were preaching your little heart out there up there on Sunday, talking about James chapter 1. And specifically, we were talking about hypocrisy, which I always find to be a difficult topic amongst ministry professionals.
Yeah.
Right? Because the high-profile hypocrisy cases are ones that make even us cringe, right? Talk about that idea of hypocrisy, especially within the context of ministry. I know for a lot of people, we all deal with hypocrisy in many different areas of our lives, but in the ministry especially, we are very careful about it these days.
Well, obviously, I mean, James is talking about, you listen, but you don't do what it says.
Yeah, right.
Which is just kind of a definition of hypocrisy. But I think we all recognize we do it, we have it at parts of our life, but we've also just seen how damaging it is. So many people that have either been hurt by the church or walked away from the church or just stay away. And so we need to address it, you know. And you're right, the big profile, high profile things sometimes make the news, but we all have got it.
Yeah. So you started your sermon saying, I'm a hypocrite, which we all agree. But there's an appropriate level of hypocrisy that we all embrace. It's a little bit like, I'm going on a diet, but starting tomorrow, right?
Yeah,
how do you draw that line? And I mean, even that's for you guys too. When you think about hypocrisy, there's a layer of authenticity where we say we struggle, or I know I'm not perfect in this. But then there's the things that are sort of bigger deals. And it's you really are a hypocrite when it comes to that, How do you think that through?
Something I was thinking about, I don't know if this is hypocrisy, but it's just something I thought about as I was processing this for my own life, was times that I intentionally try to make myself look better than I actually am. Put on something that I'm not for my benefit or people to think better of me. And you can almost see that in your heart if you are self-aware enough. That's the ones that kind of were convicting to me, just personally.
Yeah. You see that play out?
Yeah, well, I mean, like you said, I think it's hard because we all see that on some. It's like everyone's sinned, everyone's a hypocrite at some level.
Right.
The difficult part is like I know there's times where I sin and I realize it later.
Yeah.
And then there's times where I sin and I know immediately that I'm sinning and I still kind of walk through it. And it's that same type of thing with hypocrisy. It's like there's times where I look back and my life was not consistent with how I want my life to look. And then there's times where I'm walking through a situation and I can tell that this isn't right, but I still kind of keep walking because I'm hard-hearted or whatever it is, and there's a difference there in some ways, but you just have to realize we are hypocrites on some level, I guess. I don't know.
I find it a lot with my kids,
Yes.
my young kids,
Yes.
holding them
They
to
will.
this standard here, and I'm stop whining about so much, and then I'm whining just as much, about whatever it is, but definitely as a parent, I feel like that's right in my face right now. So.
And there's nothing worse because kids will call you out on your hypocrisy they know. And
Mommy,
you're like,
you're
right, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. This is a silly example of it, but I came across in my TikTok feed, there's a guy who does what he calls preachers in sneakers. Have you ever heard of this?
Yes.
Yeah, and it's like these high-profile preachers, and then they got the shoes on, and then they will zoom in on the shoes and go, these are $980 shoes.
Yeah.
And there's a layer of materialism. By the way, these are ASICs on sale at Big Five. I'm going to get them when they're on sale. But there's a layer of hypocrisy that we all sort of live with. But boy, when you're in the ministry, it can be magnified so deeply. We have to be super careful of that. And I know we all feel that. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, just really briefly too, when you're thinking of the higher profile ones over the last few years, big name preachers who have had moral failures, but yet they're teaching on these different things. You almost have to assume that it didn't start at that level.
Oh, yeah.
So hypocrisy builds in the same way all sins build. And it's they slowly let their morality shift in a certain way to look better, to do these things. And by the time it's public, you're like, this must have been going on for a long time.
Right.
And so that's one of those things. I feel like hypocrisy, like all other sins, grows as it's not checked or as there's not accountability in some ways. So
Yeah. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to us is getting caught early
yeah,
in
totally.
something that gives us the wake-up call.
Totally.
We had a staff meeting today where a lot of us were telling our story of how we got called to ministry, and so many people talked about being off the reservation, not even anywhere near the reservation, but that authenticity and even that history sometimes gives us a framework so that we don't end up with this idea that I need to look perfect.
Right.
You know what I mean? But we often manicure these profiles that people will think I look perfect. I know even when I'm preaching, a lot. I don't want to be the hero of the story, whatever story I'm telling. I'm more often to call myself out for something silly or stupid that's going on in my own mind. But I think that's part of that authenticity of trying not to get caught up in hypocrisy.
I think we really want to create a culture. I mean, we're talking about church staff, so it starts there. But throughout our church, where we don't feel like we have to try to be something that we're not.
Yeah, right.
You know, there is a sense of authenticity, and I think I'm sure our church has a ton of room to grow in this. But I think, one of the blessings of being here for a long time is I feel like we don't have to try to be something we're not. We really want people to be real and genuine, and so.
Yeah. One of the things you were talking about specific in James is this idea of listening to and accepting God's word, and then you talk about quick to listen to God, and then clearly hearing God. I think there's a lot of people who either, not that they're biblically illiterate, but maybe they aren't spending enough time listening to God to have that hypocrisy called out in their life. How do you encourage that, even in your own world or for others, to clearly be hearing what God's standards are?
Well, the way I said in the message is step one is you got to know the word. I mean, the regular spiritual disciplines of spending time with God's word. I think the discipline of being in church is really helpful. We try to, as a church, systematically go through the story of the Bible or go through the book of James to, give some system to. But I think what James is trying to hint at too is you've got to be willing to accept what's planted in you. You've got to be able to put yourself in a position where you're not clouded by the the evil desires and moral filth. And moral filth and evil is what he calls it. That can keep you from clearly hearing the word. So you got to be putting yourself in a position to hear it, but also getting your heart in a position to hear it.
Yeah. How do you feel that plays out in youth ministry with the students you guys work with in terms of literally, there's a lot of pushback at the cultural level on some of the biblical truths that, are unpopular in this day and age, but they're written right there in black and white. It's hard to ignore it,
Yeah.
How do you wrestle with that with students and?
Yeah, I feel like in some ways it's easier because students, like kids, are just more quick to call out things when they see it. It's weird. It's like, hey, wait, what is that? How does this play out? Or they're quick to have those conversations where people who are older, more entrenched with the tradition of things, maybe are slower to call things out or recognize things even. But I don't know. I mean, I think they're generationally, I think everyone desires authenticity, but there's something about the generations that are growing up with social media and the photoshopping of things and all these things that they're engaging with, even now AI and all this stuff that you're like, is this real?
You can't even tell if it's real
I think
anymore,
there's a deep centered desire for truth and being centered on something real. And so even if they can't verbalize it in such a way, I think students are looking for something to be rooted on when life at school or these other things seem more rooted on stuff that fades so quickly, on what people think of them or how many likes they get on social media or whatever it is. And so I think authenticity or hypocrisy is maybe not spoken of so much, not verbalized, but it's constantly at the forefront of conversation of how even students interact with each other, let alone the church. Yeah, I don't know.
Emily, I know you cross over, you work sometimes with junior high and sometimes with high school. I always used to say there's this transition, junior high kids are too dumb to be inauthentic. They tell you stupid stuff that you're like, I can't believe you're telling me this right now. High school
Not the junior high kids watching this.
No,
they're super bright.
But high school kids start to learn hypocrisy. They start to learn to hide it along the way. It's a funny transition to watch kids go through that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think like you said, our junior hires are a little bit more authentic, but I've seen a good shift in the community that our high schoolers have had over these last couple of years, especially our upperclassmen, to really live life together. We have an amazing group that all go to Lodi High now and have each other's backs that I know doesn't just happen here, but at school too. So it's amazing to watch in that way.
Yeah.
It's funny, this is not a serious level of this, but along the same lines, we were joking at the difference just being up at Hume Lake and stuff, seeing some of the games that middle school games put on versus the games that high school games. And we're like, why don't they do that in high school? And it's partially because like middle schoolers are still willing to look like fools because they don't realize that they look like fools. And the shift happens in high school where they're like, that's dumb. I don't want to look like that. And like there is this like self-awareness reality where people start in that age somewhere where they start to recognize how they're being perceived in different ways, and that's where some of that hypocrisy can start, because they're like, well, I'm not going to be myself because I want to be perceived a certain way, where when you're younger you just kind of are who you are in some ways. So
Right. And then there's this idea of just living it out, kind of do it, right? Is what you
do what it says is, I mean, it's pretty simple formula.
Yeah. Yet we all get hung up on that. It's easy to talk the talk, and it's not so easy to walk the walk. And as you think about that, even just from your own personal life, what is it that stops us at that moment? You know what I mean? Is it just the cost of whatever that action is? What are those things that stop us in that moment?
Well, I mean, it's different at different times, but sometimes it's hard to do the right thing.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be, but sometimes it's easier to take the shortcut, or easier. I think it's easy to give into just the temptations, or not even temptations. Peer pressure is not quite the right word, but just kind of go in the way of the world. And James calls it out. He says, don't basically go the way of the world is what he says. So it's just, I mean, we have all those things, just our sinful nature working against us. It's the world, the flesh, and the devil working against us.
Yep, that was what Gwen said.
I think Gwen said that.
Yeah, she said the world, the flesh, and the devil are those real. They fly in the face of do it.
Yeah.
And the question is, how do we overcome the world and cultural expectations and things that are flying at us all the time, our own evil flesh, A lot of people who are struggling to do the right things, whether it's, substances or pornography or whatever else they're dealing with, it's just their own flesh. And then lastly, you've got the devil himself, who's literally trying to trip us up,
I think, anytime you face, whether it's a temptation to not do the wrong thing or to do the right thing, I think it's like exercising muscles too. When you take even those baby steps, I'm going to say no to that.
Yeah.
I'm going to say yes to this. I'm going to get up a little early. I'm going to sacrifice a little more. I'm going to give a little more than, all those things kind of build faith muscles. And it doesn't necessarily make the temptations and struggles go away, but it's just, part of getting in the habit of doing what it says.
Yeah.
Right. I'm thinking of as I walk through with students who are, let's just say, for an example, a student comes to know the Lord. Before they start to recognize what a life could look like, they might be walking for years in habits or things that they have no clue is even morally wrong.
Right.
And so they're walking, and there's not even a second thought for them that they should or shouldn't be doing this action. And then they have someone speak into their life, and they all of a sudden, for the first time ever, have to go, oh man, this has just been habit. I'm having to do something. And so, even in James, the passage you were talking about, it says, be slow to speak, slow to anger. I'm thinking of a different part, but even parts of being religious. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue.
Right.
And so I guess my point in that is simply to say, it's easy at a moment of salvation or a moment of realization to say, oh, this is the morally right decision on paper. The hard part becomes making the morally right action continually. And James, I think, is trying to point that out of you guys can all say that you know what you're talking about. You guys can all say that you're followers of Jesus, but now that you've actually learned what being a follower of Jesus looks like, you have to put the hard work in to line your life up with what you've been learning. Yeah. And that's kind of the harder thing. It's not always just not doing a wrong thing. It's learning new steps that are in line with what you're learning.
Or to do the right thing, right? Too often we just back off of, maybe somebody else will handle this, but we don't take that active step to do the right thing. I'm a big believer in safeguards against doing the wrong thing. If you need another safeguard, put up another safeguard. That's not a sign of weakness to me. That's a sign of strength that you put up the safeguards. But it still doesn't always prompt us to do the right thing, which is kind of what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we watch our students go through these waves sometimes of highs and lows, and camp was definitely one of those highs recently, but aren't we all the same? And we all have highs and lows depending on what's going on in life and how easy it is to say yes to the Lord and how much easier it is to say to the flesh sometimes too. So.
Yeah.
So you turn the corner at the end to the vulnerable.
Yes.
Which is
That's the most convicting part of the passage for me.
It is totally the most convicting part of the passage. And frankly, I think we have a student population now that sees the vulnerable in the world and has a greater heart for them, maybe even than other generations past. I grew up in the 80s, everybody was just trying to make more money, you know,
Right.
and there's a layer of real social consciousness amongst the younger generation that they see these vulnerable populations and they think, what do we do? Like, how do we fix it for them? You know, when we think about sacrificially caring for the vulnerable, outside of everybody buying a minivan, like Katie Gary, you know, how do you see us, and you listed off a bunch of ministry things, but maybe let's personalize it a little bit more. Like,
that's good.
how do we do that in our individual lives to really care for the vulnerable? Because we've all pulled up to the intersection with the guy with the, I was just up in Washington for a wedding, and there was a guy who was holding a cardboard sign. It was the most creative one I had seen in a long time. It said, "I'll bet you can't hit me with a quarter." And he was dodging and weaving it was hilarious, and people were throwing quarters at the guy, you know, at the intersection. And I just thought to myself, we're all faced with those circumstances every day. Some of them overt, some of them covert. How do you step into them or not step into them, and when do you react to the vulnerable?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I actually, we were talking about this the other day too. It's funny because some of these things are things that we've all dealt with our entire lives.
Yeah.
Of like, oh, I have that moment where I feel prompted to have a conversation or step into those moments that are uncomfortable. But then when you become parents too, it's almost this extra layer of like, wow, I have all these more complex thoughts. I feel like I need to protect my kids in these moments, but I also
Big
want
time.
them to see what it looks
learnings,
like for me to engage with the vulnerable.
It's confusing.
And
yeah.
different types of vulnerable are different types of challenging. You
Yeah.
know, like there's vulnerable who are easier to love because it's just they're weak or poor or whatever it is, and you want to step in quickly. And then there's vulnerable who are more challenging to love because there's a risk on some level with them. So I don't know. I mean, I don't have a great example of that other than, you know, with young kids, sometimes I feel like I have this like weird like dichotomy of like, all right, stand on this side, but we're gonna go engage with this person.
Yeah,
and it's like it's like almost I'm guarded, but having to be vulnerable at the same time. How do I have a hard conversation with my son there? Different things like that. And so I don't know. That's a good question. I don't have it figured out yet. Sure.
I think that, at least for me, and not to be a cop-out answer, but it really is that spirit-led moment where you're like, I don't know why I'm compelled to help this person, but there's other times where I'm like, I don't know if it's safe or if I should even step into it with that person.
Right.
You know, how do you approach it?
I guess I'm thinking too, Ken Baker, one of the missionaries, said something really great. He talked about, because my tendency is when you think of caring for widows and orphans in their distress, I think of like setting up programs and like being a part of a ministry. And really, that's not, I mean, that can be part of it, but really, he says it's born out of relationship. And I just think of, you know, and even for someone like you with kids your age, in our own church, we've got all kinds of sweet widows that are not threatening or hard to deal with, but are in need.
Totally.
You know, or, you know, it's the classmate with a special need, or the person with a disability, or the, you know, whatever it is, for even someone with a different race. Or there's so many opportunities where I think for me, I want to just have my eyes open for those opportunities beyond just like a program. I guess that's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah, for sure.
I've been thinking about youth ministry a little bit as I knew we were going to sit down here today. And I want to hear about Hume Lake specifically, kind of this is a lifelong tradition for our church. Glen and I went to Hume Lake. We were going to Hume Lake before we were doing it. And so, you know, tell us about your week at Hume Lake, where you see God working in that camp environment. It's always a little bit of a rub. We're going to take them away from everything they know. We're going to engage them with, you know, speakers, and we've got all this extra time and counselors and all of that. And then they come back down the hill, and it's like back to the same old like kind of challenges of the world. How are you seeing God working in the camp environment these days?
Yeah. You want to go?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Hume this last year was awesome. I mean, we had, 90 students up at camp. And God's worked in a lot of ways. I feel like one of the biggest things that stood out to us this year was that our upperclassmen really took on our lowerclassmen as mentors and just friends.
I love that.
And
That'll translate down the hill.
Yeah, totally. And that's been something we've been praying for a really long time.
Yeah.
And so that was cool to watch. Our counselors were also amazing. I felt like there were counselors that are invested not just for that week, but you know, for the long haul, which always makes a difference in a discipleship walk too. And I don't know. You want to speak to the guys a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, Hume Lake's a unique thing because it's one of those moments where kids, they go up, some of them, half of them or more, are going up because they get more freedom than ever. Like, I got 5 hours of free time where I'm going to go chase girls or guys or whatever.
Right.
And then there's also these moments where they also get the most intense, like spiritual interactions or closeness to God because they're in nature for all these different things. So we had, the whole like spectrum of that stuff. We saw it all, and there was just in general, the guys and girls, I think we saw some really cool from our entire church, a desire to like engage with what the speaker was talking about, to dive into scripture, to have good conversations in cabin time. And so there was the peer-to-peer relationship side, which was so cool to watch, which was probably more uniquely unified than any other year. But then there was also just, we saw students wrestling with scripture in a different way. We saw students trying to figure out how to translate into what they were doing. I mean, even we had some of our students who, I don't think there was early morning optional worship one morning, so like 3 or 4 of our upperclassmen were just like, hey, anyone from our church who wants to, we're going to meet at 7 a.m. before breakfast and up on the upper lawn and do some worship if anyone wants to join. And our students just jumped in and led that, which was so cool to see. So, we saw, I mean, there was fun, there was craziness that had, but there was minor injuries, which I think we'll take it. no down the mountain trips this time. Well, one of our leaders got a little hurt with some stitches, but it was all right.
They signed the waiver.
And it was a leader. He's fine now, I think. But he stayed up there. But I mean, for all intents and purposes, all the things you would want to have at camp, I think we had this week. We had a lot of fun. So the memories and the desire for students. Part of the beauty of Hume Lake is for the students who come up that aren't fully sold or bought into Jesus yet, there's so much fun for them. Like the people who are crossing their arms, Hume Lake describes it as we put things on for them to kind of uncross their arms. So that they can just like be excited about something. And then once their arms are uncrossed, then they're more open to a conversation about Jesus. So there was a ton of fun that was had, a ton of awesome conversations from our leaders, a lot of unity amongst the students, and just a lot of growth, hopefully, in our students too. But yeah.
Are you seeing a lot of authenticity and hypocrisy was one of the themes? Are you seeing a lot of that within students? They value it so much in this generation. It's so interesting to me how deeply they value that. And where are you seeing that play out in youth culture? Authenticity versus trying to put on the mask, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think the speaker this year was especially authentic. I don't know if that's how he normally is, but he just shared from the heart. I mean, there was no hiding. Like, you knew exactly what he was thinking and stories from his past. And I think that allowed students to feel like they could be vulnerable in their conversations in the cabins. And so I think that translates into, fall programming and to being able to continue that. But they've had those relationships here, too, to be able to speak with that for a while. So
it's like, I think we were talking earlier, it's almost like this muscle that you have to like work out in some ways. Are naturally the habit is to hide the things that are difficult about our lives and to portray the best highlight reels of our lives. And all it really takes when we're at a place like Hume is for the speaker, or even I feel like we saw this in our cabin time discussions with students, is like the adult leader to say, hey, back when I was a student, I struggled with this, this, and this. And the students go, oh, you struggled with that? And they share those things. And so I don't know how to speak to it necessarily from a cultural level. I think every generation wants authenticity, but maybe more than ever, our students are aware, maybe more than ever, of the hypocrisy. And so I think everyone desires authenticity, but the new generations are more than ever aware of, just because of the news cycles or social media, they're aware of when people are not. And so they're I don't know if I can say this on here, their BS meter is
they're
high,
locked in.
They're locked in. They know when people are kind of just giving them the roundabout. And so I think,
be real or don't bother.
I think they're looking for realness, and they're gonna be so much more open to sharing when they can see even a slight realness from the leader, from cabin leaders or things like that too. So.
Yeah, that's very cool. And Hume Lake is one of those places, obviously, I love the intentionality of getting them to lower there so they can hear from Jesus or whatever. But just to shift gears a little bit, I know you guys are already shifting gears for stateside, which is a whole different experience, right? Where you take a bunch of kids into this environment where culturally You know, especially with the Mormon culture that's out there in Utah, that you guys have sort of embroiled them into this new culture. Like, there's a layer of these kids going in. They see a big world around us now, maybe more than ever. Maybe because of social media, maybe because of the news cycle or video or whatever it is. You know, but engaging them in a bigger world. Tell us about sort of your heart behind Stateside, the things that you hope these kids will get out of them. Because not that these people in Utah are so vulnerable, right? Like an inner city San Francisco trip might look different.
Right, it's not a slum.
Yeah,
It's
right,
not,
exactly.
there's different challenges.
But there's a whole big world out there that
totally.
we want to expose our kids to and get them to think through, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk about the heart behind Stateside.
Me too. Or?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So honestly, one of the best parts about Stateside, and one of the most beautiful things, is we can share with our students. Let's just take high school, for instance. So 4 years, ideally, we get students to walk through our ministry. And if we're doing things right, we're sharing the gospel, we're walking with students in discipleship. And at the end of those 4 years, if we've done that, they can have an amazing relationship with God that's authentic and all these different things. But unless we've exposed some stuff that's beyond what we believe as like orthodox and true, they're going to go off to college or the workforce or something else. And for the first time, they're going to be encountered with opposing worldviews or new challenges, and their paradigm of what was nice and easy and clear in high school ministry is challenged for the first time.
You use the nice word of encountered. I was going to say bombarded.
Bombarded.
Yeah, because they are.
Yeah. And so I guess part of our hope, and this is maybe one of the easiest first steps because it's not like it's not some crazy competitive worldview. It's almost harder in some ways.
Yeah.
But with Mormonism, there is a lot of overlap of more moral values, even some Christian story and,
We believe the
narratives.
same.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
believe
right.
in the Bible to an extent, they would say. And yet there's when you really look at it, there's I guess I would say, I'll speak for myself, that there's a different Jesus at the end of the day that I think we're really worshiping versus the Mormon religion. And so when our students go, part of the beauty of this trip is they not only get to encounter the truth of what we're telling them the gospel is, but they are sort of challenged to to understand who they believe Jesus to be in light of what some differing opinions of Jesus are with the Mormon faith. And so that's kind of part of the beauty of this trip. Is that there's some worldview elements. And then beyond that, we get to partner with a phenomenal church, Flourishing Grace Church out there, that is doing long-term ministry to a culture that is slowly shifting right now in the LDS community. There's going to a county that's 80 to 90% LDS, and just picturing that population, it's massive.
Yeah, right.
And so it's a really unique missions opportunity for us right now.
That is the prevailing culture. When you walk into it,
totally,
right?
totally.
Yeah.
I think one of the coolest things too for our students is like in order to develop that authentic faith, like letting them serve. And so Stateside provides that opportunity for them to basically like run a VBS station by themselves. And truly like they are in charge of it. They make sure they have all the supplies, and we make sure that they're not going to fail fully, but we kind of, have let them here and there so that they can develop that tool of being able to share the gospel, being able to lead a group of kids to Christ, whether it's through a fun game outside or by teaching the Bible. But they do it all, which is really awesome to watch.
At our VBS here, we have adults, partially because our church is beautiful and we have so many volunteers able to help. We have adults kind of running those things, and then we have teenagers who help at different things. But at the Stateside trip, the church that we're helping with, the volunteer numbers and the culture at Flourishing Grace, they need to run the amount of students that they're getting now for the VBS out there. Our students are solely on their own, and we do that on purpose. Like they take a station, they share the gospel, they run it all by themselves. It's not like we're not stepping in and then saying, all right, share this one part. Like they have it 100%, and it's cool. Like they have to own it and learn it and go for it. So it's a fun
It's really a terrific model that they can be a part of it here and then take it there.
Yeah.
That's really great.
I love that partnership model between here and there.
What's a typical number of kids that come through Flourishing Grace Vacation Bible School? I mean, is it?
Do you know the number?
I think Jennifer said 170 this
That's
year,
a lot.
which is
That's
a
a lot
lot.
of kids for wow.
Yeah.
So they really depend on you and your team to come out and run that program.
Yeah, and so percentage-wise for how big their church is, that's much bigger than what their church would, a type of VBS they would normally run.
Right.
Could run.
Because
Yeah.
I think our partnership and stuff, they've been able to expand their capacities and grow it, which has been really cool.
Yeah.
So.
That's very cool.
Good one.
Hey, the last thing I want to ask is about the vulnerable, and Em, I might point this question at you, is just where are you seeing students encounter vulnerable people groups or populations, whether it's at school or elsewhere, and how do you see them stepping into that? And even the way that we awkwardly sometimes step away from it in various circumstances, like where do you see students engaging with the vulnerable? We've got so much, whether it's mental health or all kinds of people who are struggling with homelessness. We've got all this stuff that's right in their face. How do you see them processing the vulnerable these days?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like they have so much grace, like even more than maybe I do
that we
at
did.
times.
Yeah.
Like they, I feel like that we challenge them with things like look out for the person that's sitting by themselves, but they like already do it. I don't know. I just view this generation as like super hands-on with it. I mean, they're not shy. They are happy to jump in, at least from what I see. And thinking about our students, they're amazing at it. So
It seems like, I mean, maybe it's a small sliver, but it seems like a lot of this generation is like, hey, we can make a difference in this.
Yeah.
They wouldn't wait for someone, and they wouldn't wait for someone else. They're like, well, I'll do that.
Yeah.
I'll start that. I'll do this. And I'm like, you go. That's awesome.
That's
Come
been part
on.
of my experience.
Come on.
We had the Upwards Coffee Bar that was just a couple of
Yeah,
high
that's
school
a great
students that were
example.
like, we want to create a special needs coffee bar where the special needs kids serve the coffee. And I'm like, yes, but I didn't initiate that. I just bought the coffee machine and said, go to it, kids. You know?
The compassion, I think, of this generation on some levels is just awesome. They have empathy for groups of
high
people
empathy.
and compassion for groups of people that I mean, it's hard to tell, like, compare to different generations. Again, there's so many reasons for it, so many more things that are kind of in your face with social media and stuff, but I didn't care about anyone other than myself growing up, you know? And so it's fun. At least we get a front row seat with some of our students at our church who are loving people well, whether they're just people at school that need help or at our church or vulnerable people or whatever it is. So we're encouraged by what we're seeing, at least.
Yeah,
Which is good.
I think that's sort of my takeaway, and we need to wrap up here. But, there's sometimes where you say to the youth pastor, good luck.
Yeah.
These kids are so challenging, these kids today, whatever. But I feel like in this day and age, it's more like, wow, you guys get a front row seat of what is a generation that like genuinely sort of wants to change the world. And we're like, how do we, you guys are on the leading edge of like empowering them to do that. And so I'm super excited about what's coming up out of this generation and sort of you guys' role in the midst of all of that. So, thank you.
Hey, can I take us back to something that happened on Sunday? And it didn't happen in all the services, and so people may or may not have seen it, but we had Ken and Gwen Baker retiring from 40 plus years of mission work, and Ken choked out.
I know what
at
you're
the
going to
end,
say, yes.
And he said, I forget how he said it, but he's like,
I wrote it down.
Come take our place.
Yeah, he said, where did he say it? Right this. Ken passionately asks young people to take their place.
Yeah,
like
come
he
take
said,
our place.
Take
We're
our place. We're
retiring,
leaving the mission field. We need people to take our place.
Yeah, who's coming next? I was like, wow, come on.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
cool.
Yeah, and it's neat to see, a couple like you guys and our ministry like our church investing in those young people to live a life on mission.
Totally.
Come take their place.
Absolutely. Stephen, Emily, thanks for being with us. Glenn, as always, here with me as always, Glenn. Appreciate you guys tuning in and checking out what God is doing in FBC and really in your world too. Encourage you to step into those moments where you encounter vulnerable people and really to take lock, stock, and barrel of our own lives, that we are engaged in the Word and that we're living it out and not being hypocritical about it. So God bless you this week.